I don't want to like this game. I agree with everything that's been said about it. I agree with all of the outcry from a lot of the Resident Evil fans that were disappointed by this. It's way too short, cuts out way too much from the original, feels lower in quality compared to the second RE remake and Resident Evil 7 and 8. It feels rushed, it feels outsourced, and honestly it's probably the lowest quality out of the modern Resident Evil games. I honestly felt really guilty about liking this game because everyone said, oh, the original was so much better. So I figured, you know what, let me just play the original. Let me set a standard so that I can return to this game and see it how everybody else sees it. Not just agree with the points they make or recognize the fact that I shouldn't like this. So I got the original Resident Evil 3. And yeah, it's amazing. Honestly, when I bought a PlayStation 1, I was pretty disappointed with a lot of like the library options. I didn't really like Tomb Raider and a lot of other games like that. I find the tank controls to be pretty annoying, and there's a lot to get used to for someone that grew up on PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3. The PS1 is a huge leap backwards in terms of ease of access. Then I started looking into like more PS1 games that I could possibly get, and one of the ones that seemed really attractive, part in the fact that I really liked RE3 Remake, was Resident Evil 3. So I got it, and I started playing it, and I loved it. Mind you, it's definitely a very challenging game, and all of those hurdles of having to get used to an older system and older philosophies in game design are still there, but I really enjoyed the original Resident Evil 3, and I started to see, you know what, there actually is a point. This really feels like something special, something that the remake just did not capture. But then it happened. There's a part eventually where you're running away from Nemesis and you fall through a hole in the ground. And when you're in there, you have to fight this worm thing and hit these switches and enable an escape route for yourself. The thing is, this worm thing can stun lock you to death. So the first time I tried it and I died, I was like, damn! And after I did this 5 or 10 times, you see, you're supposed to be able to use the dodge mechanic, like you see here, to evade the worm and, use precise timing to do all this. But the clunky controls, the camera angles that work against you, the space that just makes it very difficult to dodge, makes it feel like this is like a soft lock for people that just haven't grown up with PlayStation 1. And while I loved the original Resident Evil 3 and will eventually beat this thing, all I could think about when I was playing this was, I never felt this when playing through the remake. So I'm Pliskin, and today we're going to start talking about why I prefer the Resident Evil 3 remake to the 1999 original. So this game is divided into a couple different parts. You have the starter downtown area, you have the sewers, you have the later downtown area, you have the RPD, you have the hospital, and you have the umbrella facility. Now, the starter downtown area is a perfect introduction, and it's pretty cool and open-ended. If anything, this is probably the most similar to the original Resident Evil 3, in the sense that you get a few streets to navigate, with different shops, buildings, and multiple pathways to progress, and you need to just go around and you can explore these areas in no specific order. There's a specific goal that you need to accomplish that'll get you on to the next linear point. However, there's an abundance of side content and objectives that you could do here. So for example, one of the first goals is to start up the power to the subway. So if you want to do that, you can just pile through, put out this fire, go through the power station, find these like horrifying fucking bug creatures that literally face fuck Jill upon arrival. Or find certain key items to unlock certain doors, upgrade your shotgun, get a new pouch, find grenades, go to an area where you can find said shotgun, upgrade your pistol, fight Nemesis a couple times and weaken him and get some like key upgrades, so there's optional boss fights here as well. Solve certain puzzles that'll give you items to help you on, or go around and unlock different pathways. For example, a ladder that allows you to shortcut a certain area. It's pretty freaking great and open-ended. There's a lot of people that in my last video when they were talking about like, oh, what is an open world and what is this smaller open area? I'd say this is a small open area. This is a perfect example of how you can take that open design and apply it in a game that's mostly on a smaller scale, more dense and more linear. And here it works fantastic. But on the note of the restoring the power line area, I want to talk about this area where you get attacked by these weird spider things. Now, this is brilliant because this game feels really actiony, but at the same time it's Resident Evil, so you're expecting a little bit of horror here and there. Now in this area you get these moments where you have to go to these power generators that are really well lit with this ominous red light in comparison to the darkness everywhere else, and when you turn on the power, the camera peels back almost into a classic fixed position, and you get to see Jill restoring the power as you mash a button, and if you're there for too long or you haven't cleared out the area, you'll see the spiders coming towards you as you're doing this. It's a perfect little moment to send chills up your spine, and after going through this area and finally burning it all down, it feels really fucking good. The sewers are pretty great, they're dense, they're packed, they introduce a new enemy that we'll talk about more when we go over the actual sandbox, but it's a nice little departure from the open area. You go right into this linear area, much more evocative of Resident Evil 2 Remake, and it's a nice break from everything that you had to worry about. You get a break from Nemesis, you get a break from a lot of normal zombies, and it's just a place where you get a new introduction to a new weapon and a new enemy and how they work, and it's kind of like a nice little tutorial for things that you'll be needing to do later on in the game. The later downtown area mostly serves the purpose of having a Nemesis boss fight surrounding, all the mechanics that you just learned surrounding the new weapon that you get in that sewer area. But then there's the two areas where you play as Carlos, the RPD and the hospital. The RPD is probably one of the most linear spaces in the game, and I'm okay with this. If they actually restructured the entire RPD for you to travel through, it would be a little bit overwhelming, redundant, and you'd have like some issues with the canon. So just having to make your trip from downstairs to upstairs to back downstairs to open a wall to get through to get to a certain room is fine by me. I mean, the original Resident Evil 3 did this too, because you don't want the games to start feeling samey. The hospital, on the other hand, while still a very linear level, has a lot of open side places for you to explore. Upgrades to find, certain things that you need to come back as Jill afterwards and use her lockpicks or access certain areas that only she can go to get like key items like the Magnum, which I didn't even know was in the game until like my 9th playthrough. It's a nice little dense horror haunted house that surprisingly hides a lot of key items that reward you for being curious. Then of course you have the final Umbrella facility, which is one more linear structured area where you have to go through, fight really difficult enemies, and it's kind of like a gauntlet of everything the game has thrown at you up until this point, and then you get to the final boss fights. So all in all, the areas in this game, a lot of people were disappointed how it starts very open, much in the same vein as the original Resident Evil 3, but then it gets filtered down into these linear areas. I personally don't mind this because the linear areas tend to be really well paced, going from slowly stalking through the sewers to suddenly being ambushed by Nemesis to suddenly playing as Carlos and having to do something completely different somewhere else. It all weaves together really naturally, and I like that. That being said, I would have loved if they had more of these open areas sprinkled in between there, but that's more of a nitpicky thing. This game is really well paced. Now, this isn't the first time I've brought up this game. I've brought this up many times because I think Resident Evil 3 is a great example of a single-purpose sandbox. Single purpose means that every gun is allotted to a certain role and nothing overlaps or becomes redundant. So for example, you have the starter pistol, the Glock 19, and that serves as your mid-range, weak but reliable combat weapon that you're almost always going to have ammo for and is the most versatile of Jill's loadout. You get the shotgun that can be upgraded from pump action to semi-auto. Really serves as a good example of how to implement a video game shotgun. It's good for taking out single enemies with the least amount of ammo possible, or it's good at stunning larger enemies that take more to bring down. So for example, while the pistol is great for being accurate and just, either taking down a single zombie, shooting like environmental points of interest like the electric outlets or the explosive barrels, the shotgun is really good at just taking down a single zombie that's right in front of you, right when it's about to pounce onto you, very fast, in panicked moments. So it's powerful in the sense that it will take out most enemies in the game in a single shot, but at the same time it's not overpowered to the point where the tougher enemies can be brought down with a single shot. It's just something that'll keep you alive. The grenade launcher can take out all these harder enemies much easier than the shotgun. If anything, that's what it's here for. Enemies that regenerate, the Hunter Gammas, the Hunter Betas, or Nemesis. Whenever there is a big enemy that you need to take down, the grenade launcher is the weapon you use. Can you use it to take out all the lesser zombies? Yes, but it's really a waste because it packs so much power. So it plays a similar role to the shotgun in terms of being something that you use when the pistol isn't enough, but it differentiates itself as being that higher tier, boss fight / harder enemies type weapon, and the shotgun more so serves the purpose of clearing out more of those weaker enemies. So using both in tandem and then supplementing either one with your pistol when you have to is a nice feeling, smooth gameplay loop of just coming into a room, identifying the enemies that are there, and then picking one of the 3 weapons that's best for the situation. Maybe thinning out a couple zombies with your pistol, taking out the dogs that surprise you and rush you with your shotgun, and then when the Hunter Beta comes out, whipping out your grenade launcher and taking them down. Of course, you also have the knife, which is for, opening boxes, or if you're a badass doing that dodge thing and then getting criticals with stabbing the enemies. It's a nice little backup and utility weapon for when you're out of ammo to make sure you're never completely helpless. But then, Jill isn't the only character you play as, and while we'll talk about the 2 different characters and how they feel later on, let's bring up Carlos's assault rifle. Now this acts much in the same way as Resident Evil 2's MP5 in the sense that it's really good at either stunning large groups of enemies or just emptying out into a single enemy to bring them down. This is truly a crowd control weapon. If this and the shotgun could be used together, I would see some redundancies, but because it's spaced out between 2 different characters, there's enough of a contextual difference between the 2 weapons to make them both feel like they have a place in the game. And the assault rifle definitely has its place as just that ultimate crowd control. Then of course you have your grenades, you have your stuns that, stun your enemies, and then your frag grenades that you can use in a pinch to take down harder enemies or Nemesis if you're running low on ammo. And they're very nice little supplemental tools to use to get out of a pinch. Then of course we have all the bonus weapons that you can unlock, and of course at this point here you start getting some redundancies, but I don't really consider it to be bad when you have bonus weapons that are redundant, since the purpose of bonus weapons is to give you more reasons to replay the game, albeit a bit differently. So the Beretta gives you a nice fresh feeling pistol that's more so about criticals than it is about shot placement. So it's different play styles, albeit redundant, but it gets a pass from me because it's about being a bonus weapon and giving you more replayability. And this game is all about replayability, but we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. For now, let's talk about the enemies. We went through all the main weapons and a couple of the bonus weapons, but weapons wouldn't mean shit without good enemy design. You have the basic zombie. This is just supposed to be an obstacle. From the start of the Resident Evil franchise, zombies served as a way to keep you from getting to puzzles, key items, or resources to survive. It's something that ties directly into Resident Evil's gameplay loop of deciding whether or not an obstacle is worth expending resources and managing those resources as you go through the game. And the zombies in this game do that just fine. You have the later version of the zombies with the tail heads that are more so about like trying to get them to expose their weakness. Again, this is great and forces you and justifies stuff like the pistol or Carlos's assault rifle, where it's a better idea to engage them at distances. And justifies having those weaker weapons, for example like Jill's pistol, even after you get the shotgun and the grenade launcher. Using those would take these zombies down, but it would be a bit of a waste. And again, Resident Evil is all about keeping your resources close and not wasting any of them. So this really justifies the pistol in the sandbox, even in the late game, so I really like these guys. Then you have the Hunter Beta. These guys come from, the start of Resident Evil basically, and are kind of like mini boss fights that justify using stronger weapons, and if you've been expending too much of your resources, serve as a punishment for not saving, shotgun rounds, grenades, flashbangs, for moments like this when they count. So they're kind of in this game to keep you, the player, in check. Then you have the Hunter Gamma. Normally, I don't like one-shot kill enemies. However, these guys have such a large telegraph that I don't mind, because it's all about, reading when they're about to open their mouth and then judging that distance and then deciding, okay, am I just going to use pistol ammo, or am I going to use a shotgun to bring this thing down, or do I use my Magnum as a way to just, annihilate it and keep on moving forward. Okay, this is the part where you forgot to mention the Magnum, and yeah, you know what? Don't cut this out. Just keep it in there. Let people know how retarded you are. So anyways, guys, the Magnum, which I always tend to forget, is kind of like the Resident Evil equivalent of a sniper, in the sense where you have to line up your shot, take your time, and be accurate if you want these really powerful and rare rounds to count. And I think this is good for the later game, because there will come times where you just get a really strong enemy and you're surrounded by a bunch of other enemies, and getting close to take it down just isn't an option without dying. So Magnum ammo, if the player saves it that is, serves as a really nice kind of get out of jail free card. And in a game like this, especially on harder difficulties, you need a gun that can, give you that power at that kind of spacing. Lickers return from Resident Evil 2 and are just as terrifying as ever. They play into the actual horror and, having to sneak around them, but how do you sneak around them when there's other enemies that can see you? And punish the player for not being, smart enough in knowing the environment, because if you have to fight one of these, you're going to go through a lot of your resources. But this brings us to the biggest baddie of them all, the main attraction, Nemesis. Now, I think Capcom has this thing where they just either make completely forgettable antagonists, or they make the most terrifying, imposing, and fun antagonists to go up against. I mean, Virgil, the Baker family, and of course, Nemesis. Now, Nemesis in this game serves as the ultimate threat, the ultimate embodiment of the Resident Evil gameplay loop of deciding how you're going to use and manage your resources. Because when he appears, you can run, but it's going to be difficult. He is constantly hunting you. And there will be times where you have to fight him. So saving your grenades or getting really good with your dodges, it reinforces you getting to know the game's mechanics every time this guy shows up, because he's like an ultimate test of whether or not you know what you're doing in this game. Now, there's a couple of Nemesis encounters that I want to talk about. Of course, you have the more open area at the start of the game, which we talked about before, where Nemesis will randomly appear and hunt you down. Now, if you've been smart, upgraded your weapons, found some key items, and made yourself some shortcuts, it'll be a lot easier to evade him. But if you haven't, and you've just been spending your shotgun ammo and your grenades and not really giving yourself modes of escape, he's going to kick your ass. He serves as the final test as to whether or not you've mastered this open area, and I think that's brilliant. But then in the linear sections, he's kind of used as a transition point. Okay, you messed around with this kind of mechanic, now let's see if you know what you're doing. So for example, you have a moment where you have to run away from him in a really confined space, and this is a test of your quick thinking and reflexes. If you have a grenade, yeah, you can just take him down like that. If not, you need to figure out how to use your weapons, running through these bookshelves, dodging him, and timing the way you hit at this vent to make sure that he doesn't just bumfuck you when you're trying to rip it open. After the sewers, you get a really fun boss fight against him up on a rooftop where he's using a flamethrower. I love flamethrower weapons, or flamethrower type enemies in video games. Stuff like the Fury or the flamethrower heavies in Far Cry 4. They're perfect because they don't feel cheesy, but they feel very dangerous. They're confined to a very specific range, and if you get in that range, you're fucked. But if you manage yourself smart and evade their attacks, which are always well telegraphed when it's a fire-based weapon, you get the upper hand, and it always feels good, because there's always that margin of error that if you fuck up, this guy will just fry you. And this boss fight is essentially that philosophy on steroids, and it's always a blast to go through. Then of course you get the later stage Nemesis boss fights. You get the one near the clock tower where you have to use the mine rounds and get really comfortable with the grenade launcher if you want to take him down. This is really fun and plays around with a lot of mechanics. The arena is great. That circular motion of you just constantly moving in a circle makes it so that it never feels static. It never feels like there's a dull moment because you're constantly either being chased or doing the chasing, and that is so much fun. Then of course we have the Nemesis boss fight in the factory, which is great because you also get a couple normal zombies thrown in there. So you need to be very aware of the space and cycle through your entire sandbox. When Nemesis is up by the acid tanks, use your pistol to electrocute him. When zombies drop in and they get the drop on you really fast, you need to whip out that shotgun and bring them down. When Nemesis is down in the arena with you, you need to pelt him with your grenade launcher. If you want to hit him from really far ranges while he's like winding up this huge attack, you take out your Magnum. It's a perfect test and display of all the game's mechanics and the entire sandbox in one fight. And if there had to be a favorite Nemesis fight for me, this would be it right here. Just because, again, you're using the entire game's sandbox. But yeah, then we get the one Nemesis boss fight that I don't like. The final one with the railgun. Now the railgun set piece is really cool, and I like the idea of having to down him and then push these things in there. There's this nice level of tension where, you know, you see him getting back up and you're like, oh shit, I gotta push this in really fast and then run back. It's good, it's tense. But on harder difficulties, this fight is bullshit. If anything, it takes me back to the Worm. Where I can just get stun locked to death and not do anything about it. It fucking sucks. And again, it takes me right back to that Worm, and that's never a good thing. But all in all, Nemesis is really fun to fight, and a huge reason of why I always come back and play this game, because I look forward to fighting Nemesis in the same way that I look forward to fighting Virgil. It's a fun, challenging, but fair test of how well I know this game, its weapons, and its mechanics.
Hey, easy, lady, I got you.
Who are you? What are you doing?
Name's Carlos, and I'm saving you.
Before I start wrapping this up, I just want to talk about the two different characters. Now, both of these characters are really likable and probably my favorite Resident Evil protagonists. You know, I love my Ethan Winters, but then Jill and Carlos are also right up there. Now, before I start gushing over Jill, because trust me, I'm definitely gonna gush, let's talk about Carlos. When I first realized that I had to play as Carlos, I rolled my eyes, but after a couple playthroughs, I've realized the genius of his character. Now, of course, you have the justification of other sandbox elements with this character. The AR really changes the gameplay up and has you thinking differently when you're approaching these challenges. His punch instead of a dodge is hard to get used to, but once you get the hang of it, you start to feel much more aggressive, which is a great difference between, Jill. Every time he talks, his dialogue, his presence, it's all great. It's a very likable character. But perhaps the most genius thing this game does with Carlos is when Jill gets infected. Now, there's a lot of games, movies, TV shows where you're watching and a character is in a precarious position and you, either don't care or you're like, okay, this is just something that's happening. In video games, this happens a lot because the video game just acts like you're supposed to care about this character because your character cares about this character. But when Jill gets infected, you're immediately on the same wavelength as Carlos. And it's not just because you get to save a damsel in distress that's cute as fuck. No, it's because you've been playing as Jill. You've been in her shoes. You start to, associate yourself with Jill. So whatever she goes through, you're going through it with her. So when you're playing as someone else and you see her get hurt and your mission is now to take care of her, all of a sudden you're so much more invested because that's kind of like an extension of you. And in that sense, Carlos also becomes an extension of you because you're living through that experience through Carlos now. So it's a great way to make you care about both these characters. It's really meta and fourth wall breaking if you think about it, because like you care about Jill and now you're going to care about Carlos because of how he cares about Jill as well. There's that common ground that's developed. And it's fucking brilliant. But then on to Jill Cutie Patootie Valentine. Holy shit. Now, one of the greatest things about the newer Resident Evil games is that they've been using, actual face models to create their characters. And that means Capcom has been using obnoxiously beautiful women to portray this. Jill is on a completely other level. Now, I said I was gonna gush, didn't I? Nicole Tompkins as the voice actress does a great job at bringing this character to life. But the model for Jill in this game is fucking gorgeous, and that definitely makes it easier to play through this game over and over again. But yeah, the character is cool, she's spunky, she's angry when she needs to be, chill when she needs to be, she's tough but still human. It's good shit. It's good shit. And again, you care about her and what happens to her because you're playing as her. But in terms of like actual gameplay, I prefer the dodge roll so much more to Carlos's punch. It feels so smooth and so badass to do this dodge and then get a reflex mode where I can do critical damage to the enemy. It's like a better reflex mode. Metal Gear Solid 5 and Ground Zeroes, you had this reflex mode where if an enemy sees you, you get this slow motion for a couple seconds where you can just headshot them and keep on going. It feels like a cop-out and a way to support players that suck at the game. Here, the dodge roll works as a way to reward players that are good at the game. So when I pull this off and I get this reflex mode, it feels earned and I feel like a badass, and it's an addicting feeling. But this brings us to probably the most important part about why I like this game. The replayability. Now, I don't think I've ever 100%ed a game in my life. Maybe Halo 1 if it had a way to, count that, and Metal Gear Solid 5, I think I'm like at 90 something. But it gets to a point where you're playing a game and there's this obnoxious busy work that I don't really want to go through. I don't really want to collect all these pigeon feathers or whatever the fuck. I'm here to play the game, right? But here in this game, I feel the need to actually go through and find all these things because I unlocked so many of these challenges just naturally. Killing zombies with this weapon or with this weapon, or beating the game in this time, or doing this or doing that. It feels really good, and you're constantly unlocking these points. It's very similar to Halo Reach in the way that you unlock points to upgrade your armor. Here you do these little challenges and you unlock points to buy new costumes, weapons, concept art, all this cool stuff, and I love that stuff. I go crazy for unlockable costumes, filters, weapons, concept arts. It's great, and it's a great way to keep me coming back to this game, and I have. I've replayed this game, I think about like 32 times since I first got it in 2020, and even before that, 2021 I got it. Even before that, in 2020, back when I still had the demo on PS4, I used a lot of that footage and videos back then because I played the fuck out of that demo. There's just something so fun about this game. The dodge rolling, the unlockables, the pacing, the fights against Nemesis, everything feeds in to one another in a way that just feels so natural and so fun. And as much as I love the original, I don't get that feeling. I'm gonna go back to the original. I'm gonna get past that fucking worm. And I'm gonna get all the unlockables in that game. It's a fun game, it's a good game, and it justifies my purchase of a PS1, but Resident Evil 3-Make, the sandbox, the enemy design, the joy of unlockables, the way it pushes someone like me to try to 100% it, this is probably my favorite Resident Evil. And I recognize its shortcomings. And I kind of feel bad for saying it's my favorite Resident Evil, or one of my favorites at least, but it's just really good, and I feel a lot of people were just blinded by like nostalgia, or 90% of people didn't even play the original game, but they just listened to all these 30-year-olds that were like, oh, back in my day, the game, and I don't want to crap on them either, because they definitely had a point, but there's a really good game here. And I'm pretty sure you can get this for pretty cheap now, so if you want to, if I made you the least bit curious, or if you just think Jill looks cute as fuck in her little beret, go ahead, pick this game up. I promise you'll enjoy it. Anyways, this has been Pliskin, over and out.